Hey everybody, today is October 20th. I'm Mr. Sheridan and this is Zoology for today. I hope you're all having a great day. We have a special guest today. We have a lecturer that is going to talk to us about the estrus cycle. This is my wife, Ginny Sheridan. She works for Central Star Cooperative. She runs a sales route where she's filling liquid nitrogen tanks and breeding cows, giving recommendations on breeding. She's done some training for the company that she works for on the estrus cycle in cattle and how that works. And she's going to come in and talk to us today about the estrus cycle using the knowledge that we've done over the last week or so about the anatomy of cattle reproductive systems and the hormones that cause their cycles to work. And she's going to come in and talk to us today. So with that, Mrs. Sheridan, please take it away.
Okay. All right, can you guys see my PowerPoint? Perfect. Okay, so today we're gonna kind of build on what we've been talking about in the last probably 2 weeks. In order to understand how the estrus cycle works, you need to understand all the different parts and pieces, and then especially what you guys went over yesterday with the hormones. So, because the hormones tell the body what to do, and without it, it's kind of like a traffic cop, right? So it tells structures when to grow, when to regress, when that cow should be in standing heat so that we can get her pregnant. So those hormones are really vital to understanding how the estrus cycle works in cattle, and then further on, how we get those cattle pregnant either with a bull or with artificial insemination. So we'll go ahead and get started with that. All right. Oops. Okay, so on average, and we're talking specifically about cattle, and it doesn't matter whether it's dairy cattle or beef cattle, your length of the estrus cycle, or at least when we talk about it, is typically 21 days. So it can range. Every cow is a little different. Every cow responds differently to her hormone levels, but it can range anywhere from 18 to 24 days. Typically on the heifer side, we're going to see around 18 to 20, and on the cow side, we're going to see more of that 21 to 24. Heifers have shorter cycles, and we'll get into why they have shorter cycles, and cows typically have those longer cycles. So when we use the word estrus, there's two different spellings of the word estrus, just so we can make it a little more confusing for everybody. But estrus spelled with the OU is the actual, the entire part of her cycle where she's growing follicles and growing CLs and getting ready to get pregnant, and then either getting pregnant or not and repeating that entire process. When we talk about estrus with just a RUS, that is actually just the specific part of her cycle where she is voluntarily displaying signs of wanting to get bred. And so we typically call that standing heat, just to make it where it's less confusing. And that usually lasts about 12 to 18 hours, although just like the estrus cycle length, that can vary according to cattle, according to each individual cow. So it can be anywhere from 8 to 30 hours. So sometimes if you've got cows that you just can't see them in standing heat, they might be on that shorter side, that 8 hours to 10 hours. And typically in the summertime, especially when we're trying to get beef cattle pregnant, if it's really hot out, they're only going to display that estrus or that standing heat overnight. And so you can easily miss that particular timing and not really know when to get those cows AI'd. So just keep that in mind when we're thinking about how we're getting these cows bred. So ovulation, or the act of releasing that egg so that it can get fertilized and grow into an embryo, that usually occurs about 30 hours after the onset of standing heat. So I'm going to back up a step because I didn't go over what standing heat means. So in cattle, when they are at the optimum point in their cycle where they're ready to be bred by a bull or bred via artificial insemination, they will do what's called standing heat, where they will allow another cow or a bull to mount them, so to jump up onto them. It doesn't matter. So on dairies where there are no bulls, it doesn't matter if there are bulls present or not, they're going to allow other cows to mount them. Sometimes you'll also see mucus that comes out. And that would be what we call a secondary sign. Standing heat is kind of what we call the primary sign, the one and only true sign that she is absolutely in that spot in her cycle where she's ready to get bred. You also can look for those secondary signs, or the mucus, or sometimes cows will beller or get more vocal. Sometimes they'll be more friendly towards other cows. And so those are all things that we're looking for to figure out when those cows are in standing heat. And that's kind of a definition of standing heat. So that ovulation, or that release of the egg so that we can get her pregnant or get her bred, is approximately 30 hours after that onset of heat. And once we get to where we're talking about the AI process, we'll go into how important it is to make sure that we get this timing right, because it's a very short window where we have to get these cows inseminated in order for them to have the possibility of getting pregnant. So it can vary again, 12 to 18 hours after the end of standing heat. So when you look at all these hours, there's such a range of when she comes into standing heat and how long she's in standing heat, and then when does that ovulation occur. So we always look for the very beginning to be able to identify her standing heat, because that's kind of more concrete that she's going to ovulate around that 30-hour mark, or 28 to 30-hour mark. Okay, so we're going to get into the actual structures on the ovary and how those hormones that we learned about earlier this week kind of react or promote growth on these structures. So the first one we're going to talk about is the follicles, and it's almost like a fluid-filled sac, a blister-like structure. So these follicles, there's hundreds of thousands of them that these cattle are born with, and so they're throughout their cycle. Once they hit puberty and once they start into their estrus cycle, they're going to have multiple follicles that are present and growing on that ovary at all times. When we think about this, and we'll show a chart here in just a second, but when we think about this, there's only going to be typically one follicle that's going to actually ovulate and release one egg at a time. Cattle typically only have one calf at a time. Sometimes we'll get twins, and very occasionally we'll get triplets, but our goal is to get one live calf out of them. So that just means that one of her two ovaries is going to actually ovulate. We call that oocyte that she releases, it can be either an egg or an oocyte. We kind of use those terms interchangeably. So the follicle that grows, and you can kind of see pictures. I don't know if my mouse is gonna show, but you can see pictures of those different follicles on those ovaries. And on that bottom picture, that really large fluid-filled sac on that bottom right-hand side, that would be what we call a dominant follicle. Or a primary follicle. We use those interchangeably as well, primary and dominant. So that would be the follicle that's going to grow until it either ovulates and releases that egg, or it's going to regress if she's not in the right spot of her cycle. So we call these kind of follicular waves when these follicles are growing. And then that follicle also produces estrogen that you guys learned about yesterday, which causes those signs of heat, the standing for other cows, the release of mucus, the bellering, the nosiness, I guess, of those cows. Okay, next slide. So the other very important structure on the ovary is a corpus luteum, or what we call a CL. It is, and you can see a cross section of the ovary there on the top. It's a hard yellow structure. When we palpate cattle, or when we're going in rectally and trying to figure out where she's at in her cycle, or if she's pregnant, it feels like a wart. It's got a hard crown on it. It's not fluid filled like the follicles are. The follicles are more squishy, like a blister, when you palpate them. The CL is much more dense, and that's what produces the progesterone. So in order for her to progress in her pregnancy, that progesterone has to be present, excuse me. So if she does not have a CL, she is not going to maintain that pregnancy, because she's not going to be producing that progesterone. Okay.
Mrs. Sheridan, when you talk about palpating, what exactly does that mean, and when are you actually feeling these things? Okay, so when we palpate cattle, we're actually inserting an arm rectally, because their reproductive tract sits just below the rectum. It doesn't hurt cattle. Their rectum's a lot more flexible than we would typically think. And we would palpate in different stages of their life. So when we are doing AI,
or artificial insemination, we are palpating rectally so that we can manipulate that reproductive tract that sits just below the rectum. Typically, veterinarians will also palpate for pregnancy detection or to figure out if she is pregnant and how far along that pregnancy is. Also, if after she calves, veterinarians will palpate her as well, just to make sure that that reproductive tract is recovering the way that it should, and that there's no infection that's present, and that she's ready to go ahead and start that whole process again. Okay, moving on. So here comes, I know this slide is incredibly busy, but we're going to kind of walk through it piece by piece. So this is the estrus cycle of a cow. In this particular one, there are 3 follicular stages. Can you guys see my?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. All right. So when we talk about those follicles, I talked about those primary and those secondary follicles, or primary dominant, or secondary, and we call them tertiary, but you don't have to worry about that, follicles. So those are these little yellow circles that continue to grow. So we talked about that there's follicles that are present all the time that are growing on her ovary, and that only one of those is going to actually become dominant and possibly ovulate. So you'll see here that there's, I don't know, 10 follicles or so that sort of grow. And when we think about the hormones, this hormone here in blue, if you remember to yesterday, follicle stimulating hormone, or FSH, the hormone that stimulates follicular growth, or those follicles to grow. So you can see that there's an an FSH increase here, which is causing these follicles on her ovary to grow. And so once there's multiple follicles present, that FSH is going to decrease because she's got follicles pregnant. She doesn't need more. And you'll see that some of these follicles in the red start to die off because they're not going to be that dominant follicle. So typically about day 6 or 7, you'll get one follicle that is selected to become that primary follicle. And there's multiple follicular waves that will happen throughout her estrus cycle. So here there's actually 3. Because there are other hormones that are present that are not allowing that follicle to actually rupture. So it just regresses back into her ovary, and the whole process starts back over again, depending on where she's at. But the ovary kind of wants to have those follicles ready, depending on if those hormones are right, to be able to ovulate and cause that standing heat for her to get bred. Okay, so we're gonna keep going. Okay, so this is kind of showing those follicular waves a little bit more. This one is a cow estrus cycle. The only reason that we know that is because there are 3 follicular waves. Sometimes cows will have 3 to 4. And in the next slide, we'll look at a heifer follicular wave. So the more follicular waves that you have, the longer that estrus cycle is going to be. So in cattle, typically, we have a longer estrus cycle than we do on heifers. Okay, just wanted to show that. Okay, so here's your heifer estrus cycle. It just takes a little bit shorter amount of time just because we don't have that 3rd wave. So usually about 18 to 20 days is where those heifers will kind of land in their estrus cycle. So if you're looking to get those heifers bred and you know when she was last in heat, you're going to start looking probably around that day 17, just so you don't miss her. Where in cattle, you probably wouldn't worry about it until day 19 or so.
I think everybody knows this, but just to double check.
Sure.
That heifers haven't had a calf yet.
Yes, sorry. So heifers, yep. So just a little terminology. Heifers are cattle that have not had a calf yet. Typically, they're between 1 and 2 years old. We try and breed beef cattle and dairy cattle so they calve at around 2 years old. And then after they calve, they're called a cow. So for the rest of their life after they've had one calf. Okay, so we talked about the CL, or the corpus luteum, before, and what it does. It produces that progesterone. So this slide is showing you kind of right here how big that is getting. And actually, we kind of looked at the color of the CL, but the CL grows where that follicle ruptures. So when that follicle ruptures, it causes a hemorrhage, or a big hole in the ovary, and the body fills in that hole with specific cells that cause or that grow this CL, or the corpus luteum. So that's why these are red right here, because it's more blood, more hemorrhagic or hemorrhaging. So those CLs typically start out red, and then as they grow, they start producing more progesterone, and you can see that right here. So as that body or that ovary heals from where that opening was from ovulating, that progesterone increases as that corpus luteum grows and becomes bigger and stronger, and can release that progesterone. So that's why we call it a yellow body, is once it gets fully developed, it's more of a yellow color, and much more thick and dense consistency. If the cow does not get pregnant, there is no reason for that CL to continue to be there, because she doesn't need that progesterone in her system. If we remember, progesterone promotes gestation. Gestation is pregnancy. So if she's not pregnant, that regression of that CL will happen. So it'll die off so that she can go ahead and start growing more follicles and ovulate again. So what we call that whole process of, am I pregnant or not pregnant? We call that maternal recognition. And so when she conceives, around 14 to 17 days, that fetus will actually release hormones that cow will then say, yes, I am pregnant. I do have an embryo. If that fetus is not pregnant, it doesn't release those hormones telling that cow that she's pregnant. And that's what causes that regression of the CL, so that she can start this whole cycle over again. All right. Oh, here we go. I should have waited for this slide. But so that presence of the embryo blocks the uterus from releasing prostaglandin, which decreases that CL. And we'll get into this a little bit more as we talk about estrous synchronization next week, and how we can try and manipulate this estrous cycle through hormones, so that we can get them all to come into heat on the same time and same day. So just remember that maternal recognition, or making sure that she knows that she's pregnant, happens around 14 to 17 days in cattle. It's a little different in your other species of livestock. Okay, so now we're just looking at our different hormones. Just throughout the estrous cycle, when she ovulates or when she's in standing heat, that's day 0 and also day 21, just because it's a repeating process. So just remember, estrogen, when she ovulates, that's what causes her to show all those signs of heat. So it's really high around day 0, and then it kind of tails off until her next follicular wave with a dominant follicle comes up, and she's ready to ovulate again. So you can see how it's really high here at day 0, and then it kind of takes a back seat to all these other hormones, and then it kind of comes back up, and it's at the highest when she releases that egg. Same thing with progesterone. So you think of progesterone, it's kind of the same way as the CL. Progesterone and CL go hand in hand. So after she ovulates, that CL grows where the ovulation or that egg was released. And as it grows, it releases more and more and more progesterone until she realizes that she did not get pregnant. And then this prostaglandin starts in, and prostaglandin is what the embryo would counteract if she was pregnant. So moving on. So I know these get super busy, but I'm a very visual learner. So I just kind of wanted to show you guys kind of every angle that we could when we're talking about first and second wave. So this would be a heifer cycle again, just because she only has 2 waves, follicular waves. So you can see this first wave, and because there's a CL present, she cannot ovulate. If there's a CL present, a dominant, a big one that is producing all of this progesterone, she cannot ovulate, and that's what causes that regression of that follicle. So follicles are only viable for a short amount of time. So it's not like that first wave, that first dominant follicle could just stick around for all 21 days. They're only viable, and that egg's only alive for about 2 days or so. So once that egg dies, then that second follicular wave would start again. So she's ready to ovulate at 21 days. Okay, just another view of it. And I know these are super busy, but this one includes your CL. Right here. So you've got your CL, and then you've got your follicular waves, and then your different hormones with your progesterone. Okay. So what do the actual ovarian structures look like? What does this, all of this stuff look like in the cow? So if you look at an ovary, or a drawing in this case of an ovary, you can see that. So if you start right here, she's got a mature follicle. This is a CL that is regressing, or what we call old. It was dominant, and now, and because she wasn't pregnant, it regresses back into that ovary. It kind of absorbs it back in. So here, this mature follicle is going to ovulate, right? It releases this egg, and it becomes a massive hole in that ovary. And where that hole is where that CL grows. Okay. And then it continues to grow, and you're going to have these follicles that are developing all the time within that ovary. And then because she's not pregnant, it's going to regress, and it's going to allow this follicle down here that was developing to get mature, and the whole cycle repeats over and over and over again. So I just wanted to show you a picture of an actual ovary of a cow. So these are, it's just specifically talking about the CL, just because it's easiest to see. It's such a rigid structure. Follicles are a little bit harder because as soon as you cut them open, they're mostly liquid, and so they just kind of implode, I guess. But you look at the different growth areas of that CL here on that ovary, and we talked about it starts out really, really red because of all of, you know, that blood, that hemorrhaging that takes place that the cow is trying to stop, and then it turns into kind of this yellow body. So that's all I had to cover today, other than just talking about next week, and just wanted to give you guys a heads up. As we progress through this tomorrow, you guys, or not tomorrow, but Thursday, you're going to talk more about estrus synchronization. And again, those hormones are going to be super vital to know the functions and what kind of causes the structures to grow in the ovary, and what needs to be present to understand that. But you'll talk about that. And then next Monday, we're going to go over just an intro to artificial insemination cattle. And then wanted to give you guys the opportunity. So I will be available next Tuesday at 9 and next Thursday at 2. So hopefully you guys can make one of those lab sessions work. We're going to have reproductive tracks here at the school. We're going to allow you to try and pass the AI rods. We're going to look at ovaries and the different ovarian structures. And we can talk about different tools that we use in heat detection in cattle. So we'll have a whole lot of things that you can do. Hopefully even just I'm hoping to bring our breeding Bessie, which is the fake cow, so that you guys can try and artificially inseminate. But hopefully you guys can attend one of those days, and we'll also have a video lecture on one of those days. So if you can come on Tuesday, you can do the video lecture on Thursday. If you can come on Thursday, you do the video lecture on Tuesday. If you can't come either of those days, then try. But I really appreciate the opportunity to come and talk to you guys, and hopefully you'll get something out of this. So
thank you so much. If you'll mute.
Yep.
We get a bunch of nasty feedback when because we're in the same room. So first of all, thank you so much, Mrs. Sheridan, for coming in and talking to us about estrus cycles. Like she talked about, next week is going to be a big week because we're hoping that we can get everybody into the building. She's got all kinds of cool stuff to play with. It's going to be really exciting. So if there is a way, again, let's reiterate, Tuesday at 9 o'clock at our normal class time. So if that's the case, if you're planning to come in Tuesday, I'm happy to write your other teachers a note because you'll have to leave a little bit early and, you know, stay a little bit late for your other classes. So I get that. I'm happy to talk with your other teachers to let them know what's going on. But then Thursday at 2 o'clock. So we've got one in the afternoon. So for some of our students who are doing a career center in the mornings, then you can hopefully come in on Thursday. But again, communication's key. If you can tell me when you're planning to come, then we will, then I can communicate with your teachers and we can work that out. But it's really, really neat that that she's going to be able to bring all that stuff in. So very cool that she was able to come in. I hope that everybody has a wonderful day. We're going to stop the recording and then allow the students that are here to ask questions if they have any, and we will move on. So feel free to let me know what day you plan to come in next week, and we will talk to you all on Thursday. Have a great day.